Hey, Spoonies and Mental Health Warriors. Welcome back to Unified. We are here for our season 4 premiere, and we're so excited. I can't believe we've made it this far.
Yay! Me too. I'm so excited. I'm proud of this.
I am too. This is Kimberly Murphy here with Angie Roberts.
Hey guys.
And we do want to give you just a quick little taste of what we're going to be talking about. One of my favorite things is probably the sorority sisters. They're going to be coming in. They're a lupus group. So we're going to go a little deeper into what life with lupus is like. And Angie, what's one of your ones that stands out to you that you're really looking forward to?
I think I'm really looking forward to the sociopath.
That's always good. Yes, true. We love true crime. It's definitely not what we do here, but we love to know what's going on mentally behind all of the stuff that happens. And we're also going to do some stuff on phobias,
Yes, I
which we
can't wait
haven't
for that.
done before. So all of that is coming up in the next season. Stay tuned, and we will bring to you right now our season 4 premiere episode 1.
See you soon.
You are listening to Unified Through Chronic and Mental Illness with your hosts, Angie Roberts and Kimberly Murphy. Please be advised that some of the topics of this podcast can be triggering and sensitive in nature.
People who experience childhood trauma are 1.3 times more likely to develop a psychiatric disorder than adults who didn't experience any trauma, and 1.2 times more likely to develop depression or substance abuse disorder.
Hey, Spoonies and Mental Health Warriors. This is Kimberly Murphy here with Angie Roberts.
Hey guys, how you doing?
And we are so excited to bring to you our first episode of season 4. Today, we're going to be talking about childhood trauma and how it affects people in their adulthood, Angie?
Yes, how it affects how it affects your mental health and how it affects you in adulthood. So the definition of a traumatic event, I think it's important for us to know. So the National Child Traumatic Stress Network defines a traumatic event as any scary, dangerous, or violent event that poses a threat to the physical safety, well-being, or bodily integrity of a child. Sometimes traumatic events may directly involve the child. Other times the events involve the parent, guardian, or other caregiver, such as domestic violence.
Right.
Threats to the physical safety of a loved one may be just as traumatic for a child to see as direct threats to the child.
Oh, yeah, because their safety is in their parent or whatever. So if they're
Right.
right, so if their caretaker is being abused, that makes complete sense. And it struck me that in the actual definition, it does say, perceived threats basically, because it's different for everybody how a situation can feel.
And that could be bullying.
Right. So it's
Something is
very
major
subjective.
bullying.
It's very subjective to the person themselves and how they interpret what's happening.
It's really like PTSD, or any other
Mhm.
thing that causes you trauma. It's one of those, I may get trauma from something that you may not get trauma from. So
Right. I mean,
that's interesting too.
there can be kids that grow up in the same sort of domestic violence situation and all turn out different because of how they've perceived that threat or internalized what's been going on. Uh,
Right.
so it could
And
be
there's
more traumatizing to one than the other.
definitely it can. And it's interesting. We're going to talk about that. It's interesting how that can happen.
Hmm. But there's different types of childhood trauma, right? I mean, there's what types of things
Definitely.
can actually cause it?
There are several types of childhood trauma, and some of these are actually they were very interesting for me to find out. But first, of course, the first one is abuse, sexual, physical, psychological, anything like that. Life-threatening accidents or illnesses, violence in school or the community, bullying, domestic violence, as I
Hmm.
said before,
Hmm.
natural disasters, acts of terror, like um, when the schools get
9/11.
Yeah.
Hmm.
All kinds of stuff like that. Actually, the public health crisis, such as COVID-19,
Right.
loss of a loved one, especially sudden or violent in nature. And you've got to remember these are kids. And I mean, we even have issues with that. So,
Right.
kids, refugees of war experience or war experiences.
I know. I couldn't
And
even imagine that. Oh my
I
goodness.
can't, right? They have to be really,
But then
and neglect.
neglect
Yeah.
even. Yeah.
Neglect is a type of abuse and it definitely causes issues.
And I think a lot of the 80s generation can really actually relate to neglect. And that's not a joke but we were latchkey kids. So I
Yeah.
think a lot of those kids felt that way. And also, like I remember hearing quite a few times actually that 1 in 4 kids or women, or is it women or kids, Angie, that suffer from abuse? 1 in 4. Is that
One in
just
four women.
girls or is it girls and boys?
1 in 4 women.
Women. Okay, so
Hmm.
thinking about this, the numbers are obviously going to be higher.
Right. Oh, definitely.
Hmm.
Right. The trauma it can be so bad and probably things that we don't even think about. And of course, trauma can increase anxiety and depressive behaviors and
Right.
be able, where you can't cope with stress so much. And it can also cause PTSD, according to Psychology Today.
Right.
I haven't
Hi,
mentioned them in a
Psychology
couple
Today. We're
episodes,
getting
but
that. We're getting that sponsorship, guys. We're working
I
on it.
know.
Truly.
It'll, and if not, just can I have an issue subscription? I mean, I quote y'all enough. Anyway, uh, traumatic experiences they burrow deep down into the body and contribute to chronic illness also.
Hmm.
So, um, the unresolved, um, I'm sorry,
The unresolved trauma just builds up in your body and causes illness, like autoimmune
right, and it
diseases and
says
stuff like that. Hmm.
right, and it says data from a 2019 survey showed strong correlation between unsolved trauma and the risk of cancer. Now,
That
isn't
is
that
so
interesting?
bizarre to me. I know, like, I mean, I get it because we do always talk about the mind, body, spirit connection,
Right,
but
but we
like
don't.
this is very strong evidence that it really truly does. If you don't deal with what's going on in your spirit and your brain, it's going to come out in your body for sure.
Right, and it
That's like,
gets more. This just gets more interesting as it goes.
mhm.
It's something else.
Right, right.
Childhood traumas that involve sexual abuse can lead to long-term sexual dysfunction, which I
Hmm.
didn't think about,
Interesting. Okay.
and higher likelihood of sexual risky behaviors, which I didn't know that, but um, it makes sense. I
Yeah,
don't know why, but
promiscuous
it
kids are normally
sexually abused. Yeah,
right. Hmm.
it's
Yeah,
interesting how that happens.
I know.
Um, It can lead to long-term cognitive disabilities and academic challenges for children who have gone through trauma or long-term trauma and may show even defects in their language development and abstract reasoning skills.
Okay. Yeah.
So, many
That makes sense to me too. Which is one of the reasons I think doctors really try to make sure those markers are being met because it
right.
it could open up.
It actually tells them more than we realize.
Right. Yes. And it can tell the doctor if there's any issues in the home or at least maybe tip it off to further investigation.
Right. And don't be scared if your child, I don't want you to be scared if your
No,
child
no, no, no,
is
no, no, no,
like,
no,
yeah,
no.
that's not going to be the first thing they
It's
look
one
at. They're going to
tiny
send your,
little piece of a
yeah,
huge
like,
puzzle. Right.
my child is having, I think he's a little delayed. So they're sending him to a neurologist. So that's not the first thing they look at.
No, absolutely not. I had issues with Max. So I understand how much fun that can be, but they do all kinds of testing to make sure that the child can hear and see correctly, and they're not going to jump
Yeah.
to the worst conclusion, obviously. But
No.
it is a piece. Like if there's other things happening, that might be one of the puzzle pieces to put it together, is
Right.
all I'm trying to say. Don't want to make anybody afraid out there.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I never want to
Yeah,
make anybody
yeah.
scared.
No,
They're
absolutely
also
not.
at a higher risk for obesity, which I find interesting. I guess that would be true if
Well, I
if they
mean,
have a
think
higher
about,
risk of depression
yeah,
than
and there's a lot of
these.
people who turn to food and do comfort eating. Probably learn that
Right.
at a young age.
Probably. Yeah.
Hmm.
And there are 30% children experiencing 4 times the amount of trauma were 30 more times likely to have behavior and learning problems than those not exposed to trauma. So 30 times more if you
Wow.
experience a trauma. Now, I did have some childhood trauma, and
Mhm.
um, I had a lot of trouble with learning, especially after it all started. And I
Right.
can definitely see how the 30 times more, because I went from an A student to an F student. So, I can see how that definitely affects you.
I think that there's no way for that it couldn't. I mean, you're a child who's dealing with a trauma, and that's really going to encompass everything in your world. Like you,
Right.
so I mean, you're going to be sitting in class, and are you really going to be focused on math when you're
Definitely not.
in a traumatic event and you're in that freeze and mode
Fight,
for me,
flies,
right?
fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, which I found out, which I think we may do an episode about.
Yeah,
Can't
and
remember.
we just did post
Found that.
on our Facebook page about fawning. So
Right.
um that's another one, you're right.
Oh, we
But
did?
could
No,
you
I'm just
imagine
kidding.
sitting
No, really, we did?
can you imagine sitting there as a child though, and you're going through this traumatic, horrible abuse, or somebody died, or whatever may have happened to this child? It's got to be really hard to learn in school. Like that's
Right.
you're in survival mode. Until you get out of survival mode, how are you going to advance any further?
Yeah, I heard you get whatever age you get stuck at in your childhood trauma is kind of the age you're stuck at,
Hmm.
because you're stuck. Literally, you're stuck.
They say that
You
about people with substance abuse issues as well.
Yeah.
Whatever age you started using substances is how mature you are, because you stopped maturing at that point.
Right.
Hmm. Because
That's interesting.
you're not dealing with your traumas anymore. You're covering it
Right.
up with drugs. So yeah, that
So
is
sad.
interesting. It is sad. It is sad.
There's a little bit of, there's a few other effects of childhood trauma. Just they can, but they might not exhibit the signs of PTSD,
Hmm.
but they may struggle with these behavioral issues like anger, difficulty focusing or paying attention, changes in eating habits, new fears or phobias, increased obsession with safety.
Hmm.
That would be so sad, because that means that they're scared all the time.
Oh, I know. That is really
Increased
sad.
focus on death and dying, and insomnia or
Oh,
fightful,
fitful sleeping.
fitful sleeping. Yes, sorry about
Yeah.
that. Yeah, so they might not sleep, may not eat, they may come and just thinking about death a lot. And
I
if this
know.
is
Isn't that sad? Like these are not things that kids should have to be thinking about at all.
Yeah, and
Um,
there's a lot
yeah.
of traumas that can happen to children that you didn't really do them. Where, like I said, everybody is very sensitive to
Hmm.
what they see maybe on TV or what they see out in the world. So this may not be an issue with the parent. So
Oh,
now I
right.
don't want everybody to think that, we read those other
Right.
reasons, because it's not always a parent issue. It's not always a person issue.
Nope.
So,
I actually have a good
right.
example of that. I have a good example of that real quick. I was little, probably 4 or 5 years old, playing in the front yard, and I think it was a group of Mormons or Jehovah Witness. I'm not sure which, but they were
Mm.
circling through the neighborhood and they were giving out their pamphlets. And I didn't know what the pamphlet was. I could barely read. So they're like, "Do you want a pamphlet?" And I said, "No." And this little boy looked at me and said, "Well, now you're going to go to hell." And I'm telling you now, it traumatized me for years. Seriously, my mother was just like, I can't believe how much this traumatized you, because later there was like something scary on TV, and I was like thinking of the worst of what the boy said, and I'm like, I'm gonna go to hell. And it's gonna be scary there. And it's
Aw.
gonna look like that place that was on TV, and stuff like that. So you're right. You never know what's
Yeah,
going to really stick with somebody and how it's going to affect them.
especially children, because their brains are so
Yep.
innocent and, well, little children anyway.
Right. Exactly. I mean, who tells a 5-year-old they're going to hell?
Yeah, like,
And again, to the Jehovah Witnesses or the Mormons, I know that this is not something you would approve of.
right. That's not, we know that's not a
That's
normal
not
thing.
what you
And if
normally
anybody
do.
thinks that,
No,
yeah,
no, it
that's
was
not,
just
that
this
is ridiculous.
one particular kid that said it to me. Yeah, it was one of the kids that was
And
with
he
us.
was a kid.
And he
So,
was a kid. Exactly. He was a kid. I just want to make that clear. But yeah, that was traumatizing to me. I believed it. So
so off to a little science time with Angie. So, guys, don't get too lost in this. So, oxytocin is a hormone produced by the brain, commonly known as the love hormone. So, abuse can affect these levels of the oxytocin hormone, of course. The love hormone, the more you love you get, the more oxytocin, it's the happy feeling, and everything like
when you
that.
give someone
So,
a hug, yep, when you give someone a
yeah, when
hug, it releases oxytocin.
right. When you're with your children and you're cuddling your children and you're coddling them and you're loving on them. And the more you do that, the more oxytocin is produced in them. So that's a good thing, right?
Right. You would
Right.
think.
So,
Yeah.
right. So, early life stress causes oxytocin levels within the hypothalamus, which is the frontal lobe, and the amygdala, which controls your emotions. Um, they're both important parts of the region in producing oxytocin, excuse me, and emotional regulation. Even the functioning of the oxytocin receptor is altered following early life trauma. So you actually have something in your brain that is altered, as you know, it's not
Wow.
just memories, is what I'm trying to say. So there's a physical change there.
And now you're not able to have as much oxytocin in your
Right.
system that your body is supposed to have.
Right. Because
Oh, that
now
is
the
interesting.
receptor isn't working fully.
Hmm.
So even though people show you so much love,
You're not going to
the
feel
happy
it.
the happy feeling may not be, and that can make a lot
Angie,
of sense with depression.
you have just answered so many questions for me.
So it can make so much sense with depression, you know what I
It
mean? Like
makes so much sense.
why
Yes.
we don't feel like people love us you know,
Wow.
when we
Yeah.
get into those depressive moods, it could be our lack of oxytocin, as
Hmm.
our oxytocin receptor might be messed up. Just tell everybody your oxytocin receptor is messed up in your brain, and
And
they'll
I
be like,
imagine it would affect your
okay,
relationships with friends and dating and things like that. So,
with
wow. I
everything,
mean,
everything.
all
So
your relationships. Yeah.
yeah,
Wow. Okay. That is very interesting.
traumatic events are um, all add up,
Hmm.
unfortunately. Sometimes people don't think about that. They think about, oh well, they had this traumatic event, so they have another traumatic event, that it's not a big deal. You should be able to handle it, right? What
Right.
doesn't kill us makes us stronger, so they say.
Hmm.
Not with mental health. Okay, I'm just going to tell you that that does not happen with mental health.
No.
So the more traumatic issues a person is exposed to, the greater their impact on their mental and their physical health. Trauma history is associated with poor outcomes of survival, more like survivalists, more likely to die by suicide, self-harming behaviors, longing, and more frequent hospital admissions, and they have higher level of meds than most people.
Wow.
And here is the whoa. Trauma can cross generations socially, psychologically, and genetically.
And that just blows my mind. I'm like,
Yes.
I'm serious. Like,
Something that happened to your great grandmother can be affecting you today.
yeah.
Things
So,
that we do today will be affecting our great grandchildren down the road.
right, which is
So
something like that's a lot of pressure in a
that's
way.
pressure. I know I heard somebody say that. I was like, what? No, don't tell me.
Well, it is kind of, but at the
But
same
it is
time,
true.
it's also okay, so that makes sense that in my family we all have this issue. We're prone to depression or whatever because our traumas are being crossed down. Like, I can't even.
Right. It
How does
is a
that
lot.
happen? So how does that happen? We probably don't have time for all that, so that's another podcast. You
Yeah.
can answer that question in another podcast.
Good. So I can do some research first. That would be nice. She always asks me these questions, guys. She always asks me a question every episode that I am stumped and I don't know the answer to.
Well,
She just
I've
does that to me.
decided that I've done my job if there's just one. I'm asking really good questions if there's just one. So I'm here for you people. I'm here for the listeners who want to ask that question that challenges us.
Right.
In
And
this case, challenges Angie.
right. I don't know really how to break down genealogy to you.
in the 10 minutes we have left, probably.
Yeah, and probably
Yeah.
the 10 minutes we have left
Yeah.
to the other
Yeah.
part.
But it is like, it's mind blowing to think that.
And the people when you start really thinking about when you really start thinking about slavery and you start and I'm not just
Yeah.
talking about black slavery, slavery in
No, but
every
you're
country
right.
and oppression and the Holocaust
That
and
was the
just
first thing
all
I thought
these
of. Hmm.
huge things that happen to people that that probably affect us or not us. Well, I don't know. Could be us because we're so mixed.
Right.
Um, but affect people now, still yet in their brain, and they don't even know why they're being affected because their great grandmother was affected by the de- um, the depression. My
Right.
my father was my grandmother was affected by the depression. My grandmother, my grandfather, my dad was a hoarder of food, of he
Wow.
didn't trust banks with his money. I don't trust banks with my money. So it's weird how it's just weird.
I think most of us assume that we learn a lot of this from our families.
Right.
So we were taught, at least I was taught, break the cycle. Break the
Right.
cycle, change the narrative in your family. You can do different, even though, because they say abuse is passed down.
Right.
Hurt people. And so
That's
they're like,
very true too.
and so they're like,
Yeah.
break that, you can change it. But I mean, a part of it really is just already engraved in you. Like, you are born with this trauma attached to you. So
Right.
it's not something you could just deal with on your own. You have to work at this, I would assume, always. Okay, so if generations are just passing down their trauma from one to the next, how are we going to tell, who's really traumatized and who isn't? Because it sounds like, a lot of people
Right.
could
And
be.
your genetic markers, I will say, they can turn this genetic on and off as they turn any genetic on and off.
Hmm.
So you might not get it, but your sister might get it.
Right.
Your, brother might get it. So, but how they do that is they break it down in when they're watching the children. They
Hmm.
break it down into three groups. They break it down into preschool, elementary, and middle school, high school.
Okay.
So the children at the preschool, you may see fear of separation from their parents or guardian, which is
Right.
can be normal or it can be the sign of this. But I think you have more than one sign, definitely.
Right. Hmm.
Having nightmares, poor eating habits, or sudden weight loss, and persistent cries or screams.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. And some of that stuff can be other stuff too. So you just really have to take your child in and get them evaluated.
That's just another piece of the puzzle, like we were saying earlier.
Right. It really is.
Yep.
And so in elementary school, they start having feelings of guilt and shame. They become fearful and anxious. They have sleeping problems and have difficulty concentrating. That's only in elementary kids. Now they're fearful and anxious.
Yeah, and it's got to be hard
Yeah.
to learn all the things that you're supposed to be learning when you're more focused on these feelings that you have. It would make it incredibly hard.
And middle school is where I started with my trauma. So by the time we get to middle school and high school, I definitely had 3 out of the 4 of these: depression, feeling of alienation, eating disorder, and self-harming behaviors. And I also know that I thought a lot about suicide at that time.
I did too.
So yeah, I'm just going to add that from
and this
my
is
point of view.
For me, this is about the time that I got cut off from my family around this time period, and was going through all of those feelings, plus the feelings of, grieving loss and things of that nature. So it can be a lot on a kid. And like, to go to school, I couldn't have imagined sitting down and caring about algebra during that period in my life. Who cares about that, And that's honestly how I felt. So I can completely understand how these feelings make it incredibly hard to like mature or learn anything.
Yeah, it's very
You're in survival mode. Yeah, you're in survival mode.
You really are in survival mode. Unfortunately, like 2/3 of children report some kind of traumatic incident by the age of 16. That's what the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Awareness Administration, estimates. And then, isn't that crazy?
That's too much.
2/3 of all children.
What are we doing? What are we doing? Something's wrong here. We got to fix that. Yeah.
There's a lot going on in the world. And
I know.
Lot,
Yeah.
When you think about it being 2/3 of the population of the children of the whole world, and then you start thinking about what not Americans go through, what you start thinking about the little kids go through in Africa and all these places, and it makes sense how there's so much childhood trauma.
I know, it's just sad.
It's so sad.
It breaks my heart. Yeah.
So it's very PTSD is a very real condition. Of course, we've talked about it before. And the National Center for PTSD says up to 50% of girls and 6% of boys develop the PTSD.
They used to say that girls couldn't even get PTSD. Nobody other than soldiers could get PTSD.
PTSD, right.
And now they're saying for kids, it's mostly girls.
Yeah, it's a higher rate. Girls are more emotional than boys.
I find that really interesting, though. I mean, the way that it's progressed and people have realized that PTSD is much
an actual
an
actual disorder for everybody instead of just soldiers or boys, men.
Exactly.
But I do believe that it may be higher than that because boys and men and people, they don't boys and men, they don't talk about they're taught to not talk about their issues so much. Man up, don't cry, don't do this, don't talk about that.
Yeah, and a lot of the soldiers are especially drilled to feel that way, so a lot of them don't want to get treatment.
Right, definitely. It's so sad.
It is.
So if you don't know, PTSD is a mental health condition that can impact children in different ways. Some children find themselves replaying the traumatic event in their minds, reliving the stress and agony. Others reenact the traumatic event in play. Still others avoid any person or situation that might remind them of the trauma. Some children may also believe that they have missed warning signs about the traumatic event and therefore become hypervigilant to the point of obsession. Now, hypervigilant is where you are constantly worried about your surroundings. You're looking for the trouble. What is going to happen next to you? There is no way. I'm a hypervigilant person. I have hypervigilance. There is no way I could go through school like this.
Yeah.
No way. Because I'm more worried about what is going on around me when I'm like that than I am about anything that is okay.
And this would probably be the kid that would be labeled as a troublemaker or something and
Could be.
non-compliant.
Right. Is
Um,
non-compliant. Yeah.
if there's, slip through the cracks and nobody realizes that they're actually having a lot of trauma that they're
Yeah.
trying to work through. And a child is not going to be able to do that by themselves.
But
So,
right. And they experience a range of symptoms like
mhm,
anger and increased aggression. So that could be right there where they're labeled the troublemaker.
right.
Anxiety, depression, mistrust of others. So you might not even trust your teachers. Fear, alienation, low self-image, which is so sad, and
Mhm.
self-harming behaviors also again with the
Yeah.
PTSD.
Aw. I mean, those signs are horrible. I just think about all the kids that go through this. These are the kids that tend to get bullied too. Uh,
They are bullying. Like I said, bullying is a childhood trauma, and I was bullied from kindergarten to high school, so
yeah.
I can see where that also
It
has a lot of
just makes,
issues.
yeah, and it just makes it so much worse because now they're suffering another trauma of being bullied.
And being bullied by more than one kid can be a separate trauma.
Mhm.
You know
Yeah,
what I mean? Like
exactly.
one kid's bullying you over here, one kid's threatening to hurt you over here. Of course, that would make you hyper vigilant because you have all these people saying they're going to beat you up, and you know,
Right. And then you're going to grow up into an adult that has that history, and that's hard to,
right? Or you may even turn into the bully because you
yeah.
are done being bullied.
And I mean, I think it's important to really understand all of this, no matter who you are, because any sort of traumatic event, if you haven't dealt with it, like I was the kind of person where I would go through traumas and I'd stuff them down. I wouldn't understand what the value was of talking to a therapist or,
Right. I was the same way. They tried to make me go to a therapist. You know what I told him? I
what.
was like, they took my mom and stepdad out of the room, and um, he said, "Well, now you can talk to me." And I said, "You can't help me because I'm not going to talk to you." He's
Oh
like,
my
"Well,
goodness.
that's true." Well, oh my goodness gracious, Angie. Should be ashamed of yourself.
Right.
But I was a kid and I was having
Right.
really bad problems, and I didn't trust anyone,
Right.
especially somebody I didn't know and I felt would be on my parents' side rather than mine. I
Hmm.
didn't know anything about therapy at that age.
Right. So
We
like
didn't
I'm
talk
I'm
about that.
feeling that way too. And I'm just like, am I especially my family, therapy. And but yeah, I would push everything down and figure, there's really no dealing with it. You just kind of move on. But this whole episode is why it's so important. It just screams to me, you have to deal with your past traumas. You have to.
You do.
Um, not just for yourself, but for your next generation. you know,
Right. And your
you're
generation
responsible for
after
them
you.
too. I know. So if you
Right.
really want to break the cycle, if you truly want to break the cycle, it has to come from within. You have to deal with the traumas that you
Right.
are suffering within yourself. That is the best thing that you can do.
I
Um,
absolutely agree with that. Yes,
yeah.
professional help is wonderful. If you notice your child is having some issues, don't be afraid to take them in. There are wonderful child counselors that can help them, and then they can grow up to be even better adults and more effective and more efficient,
Efficient. Yeah. Because the
efficient.
sooner you get help, the better off you're going to be. The earlier you start therapy. You don't want to
Learning
be
those
an
coping
adult.
skills is,
You don't want to
yeah,
be an adult like me and have to go all the way,
girl,
That's tiring.
it is tiring. Therapy is tiring for
Hmm.
old people.
It is. Start young. No, it is,
Right.
but it's true. Yeah. The earlier you can do it, the
Yeah,
better. And so now we know what to look for. And all this has been really, really amazing information, Angie. So thank you so much for researching all of that and letting us.
absolutely.
Yeah. So what is the mantra for this week?
Mental health problems don't define who you are. They are something you experience. You walk in the rain and you feel the rain, but importantly, you are not the rain.
I think that's so important to remember too. That is such a
Right.
good one. Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I like that one because it's true about mental illness. Don't forget, you are not your mental illness. You're not your physical illness.
Hmm.
You are still an individual and yourself. So,
And I know there's a lot of advocates out there, and that's completely different. But when you identify yourself as your illness, it's a dangerous thing to do
right.
because there's so much more to you that can grow and mature and thrive in spite of your illness. So, yeah, you are not your illness.
Definitely.
There's so
You are
much more
not
to
your
you.
illness.
Well, we hope that you enjoyed this week's episode. And if you did get something out of it, please like, share, follow, or subscribe. All of our social media information will be announced in just a moment. Please join us next week for a brand new episode. You don't want to miss it. Until then, please remember we're always stronger together. And thank you for listening.
Mask up. Peace out, guys.
Unified Through Chronic and Mental Illness can be found at anchor.fm/unified. There you can find all social media links as well as other ways to listen. Are you recording yet?